Hello and welcome. Today's tier list is going to focus on weapons and weapon aspects for Hades 2 based on the early access balance. So, in the future, this might not be accurate because weapons can get buffed and weapons can get nerfed. So there's three methods that I'm going to use to rank these aspects. First up, how requirement heavy is it? Do you need rank 5 of the aspect, or can rank 1 work fine? Do you need a specific boon, a Daedalus Hammer upgrade, or does it kind of work with anything? Obviously, the more flexible it is, generally speaking, the more likely the rank's going to be higher. Number 2, how much success have I had with it personally? Because something can be the best weapon possible on paper, and if I can't complete a run with it, well, either I'm not that good at it, or the weapon isn't that good, and since this tier list reflects my subjective experience, really it could be either one. Then number 3, the fun factor. Some weapons are just more fun to use than others, and I'm going to talk about that here. Now, when the game releases fully, we're going to have a new weapon, and we're probably going to see a lot of rebalance. They may even add more aspects. So, be sure to get subscribed, that way you won't miss the tier list when it comes out, because I will update it. For now, let's get into things. So here we've got all of our weapons and all of our weapon aspects. As I talk about these, there's a couple that I'm going to show some gameplay for, but those are the really special ones. So first up, Deskira the Witch's Staff with Aspect of Melanoe. This is, I would say, the textbook definition of a B tier weapon. It's fine. There's nothing bad about it. Getting easier channels, definitely a good thing, but it's also not super spectacular. It's a really good starting weapon. I'm absolutely glad that it exists, but it's fine. It's B tier. Next up, we have the aspect of Circe. And I'm going to go C here, because in a lot of ways, Circe is just Melanoe again, but with extra steps. You do get a magic recovery. And the magic recovery is kind of cool, but you need to land attacks and specials. Whereas on Melanoe, the channeling's just kind of happening all the time, plus it scales a little bit harder. Luckily, these are all very versatile weapons. You don't get pigeonholed into too much, though I would certainly recommend builds that use Omega moves if you're playing either of these aspects. Which is why, if I had to pick a strongest aspect from my experience for the staff, it's absolutely Aspect of Momus, especially since this is how I beat Heat 32. So, Aspect of Momus gives you a bonus to your special. You can then spam your special for quite high base damage, and enhance it with either flat damage from a boon of Poseidon, or something like increased damage from a boon of Aphrodite. This is very powerful. It doesn't require Omega moves. It can be used at close range. It can be used at long range. You even get a heal. Aspect of Momus is totally insane, though I do recommend ranking it up. And so, for those reasons, it's my first S tier. I'm firing my special from a distance, and I'm able to completely destroy enemies. If I need to get up close, that's certainly going to be more damage if I'm using something like Aspect of Aphrodite. The only problem is it's not great for AoE. So you can use a cast that freezes enemies, you can inflict Hitch from Hera, or you can solve it by just not worrying about it and laser beaming one thing down at a time, though some of those swarm levels will get a little bit problematic. That said, this is where your Omega special comes in. It scales off of all those nice damage bonuses you've already stacked on your special, and it does hit quite hard, especially with the Aphrodite version, not quite as much with the Poseidon version, though it is the Poseidon version that I used to clear Heat 32, just because I wanted the extra safety of a knockback. This special does way too much damage for how fast it fires. So that's why it's one of my favorite aspects, and I would say incredibly strong, since it was surprisingly easy to beat Heat 32. I was expecting it to be a real struggle after trying out a couple other aspects. Nope, Momus absolutely carried me. And so now, coming back to a tier list, we've got the Sister Blades, Lim and Oros. Starting with Aspect of Melanoe, which is pretty well balanced. If you can pull off a backstab, it does quite a bit of damage, but if you can't pull off a backstab, it doesn't offer you any bonuses. That said, I would say that Lim and Oros themselves are pretty good weapons as a baseline, so I'm certainly leaning towards the upper part of this tier list. But is it an A or a B? And I think I'm going to go B here just because of the additional positional requirements. And the same can kind of be said for Aspect of Artemis. While Aspect of Artemis does give you a pretty nice bonus where you can parry and riposte, you do have to time it correctly and make sure it's active. And so, much like my rankings for Deskira, I'm going to go with C. Yeah, turns out it's a pretty solid all-around choice. It's not terrible, but it is a little bit harder to use. That said, if you do manage to parry Kronos, oh my god, does that feel good. Then last up, Aspect of Pan, where you get additional blades from your special, and if you drop your special in your cast, or more accurately, if enemies are in your cast, the blades from your special will seek them. This is another very powerful build. I'd say it's slightly harder to play and slightly more requirements than something like an Aspect of Momus, but it's still incredibly powerful, and I'm definitely putting it in S tier. I completely destroyed a bunch of bosses with it. I was seeing like 2,700, 3,000 damage. I'm sure it could get higher if I focused in on something like an Aphrodite boon. Try to get something like hook knives, or maybe if you're lucky, get both hook knives and something else to enhance your special. You'll be having a good time pretty soon. Because it is a channel build, it's a little harder to use on a fight like Kronos, since he ignores the time slow from the Sorceress Arcana. That said, it trivializes everything else in the game. It's great against Eris, and against Kronos you can still stand back. Remember, you can drop your cast from a distance, and Kronos won't be able to do anything because all of your blades seek him. Just keep in mind there are limits to this. It doesn't give your blades infinite range. Also, I personally found that Spiral Knives was not a great choice to combine with this, because while Spiral Knives on paper does a lot of damage, in practice it greatly limited the range at which I could fire. Okay, now we're coming to the Umbral Flames. This is by far my least favorite weapon. I find the attack to be very clunky, and I get it, that's kind of a point. You have to use a channeling playstyle, and I find it nothing short of infuriating that you can't interrupt enemies with the special effectively. They get hits off. And so I have to put it in D tier for the fun versus frustration factor alone. At least for Aspect of Melanoe. I tried to make special spam builds. I tried to use the extra special duration. It just wasn't fun. And then we've got the Aspect of Moros, which unfortunately runs into a lot of the same problems. And so it also goes in D tier. Yeah, not a fan of these. Maybe in the future they'll get buffed. I honestly hope they do. I think the special should be made just a little bit faster so it can reliably interrupt enemies. And I think the attacks, channel versus regular, should kind of have their functionality tweaked a little bit so the animations don't feel so bad. But then we have the Aspect of Eos. I have to say, I was surprised at how much success I had using the Aspect of Eos, given that I generally hate this weapon. When you're playing Aspect of Eos, you fire out your attack, and then when you sprint, the projectiles are all pulled to you, dealing damage to any enemy they pass through, and they get a bonus for existing for longer and reaching a maximum amount of damage. So as it turns out, this isn't half bad, and I kind of like the fire and yoink playstyle. I'm going to put it in A tier, both because I was surprised at the success, and because if all the aspects felt like this, honestly they'd be pretty solid weapons in my opinion. Then we have Zoraphet, the Moonstone Axe. This is an incredibly powerful weapon, and in general, I'm tempted to put it in the upper tiers, though not all versions are made equal. So, the default version, Aspect of Melanoe, gives you faster recovery, i.e. the relatively slow animations are easier to recover from. Because Zoraphet's moveset is so strong, I wouldn't feel comfortable putting it anywhere below A tier. So, it's going to go in A, and now we're going to build on that, because then you have Aspect of Charon. This one's been a real roller coaster for me, because when I first started playing it, I was trying to exclusively do the cleave casting, which didn't go very well, because cleave casting is kind of hard to pull off, again, especially against a boss like Kronos. This is because there's a short window between when you are channeling into your special, and you're invulnerable from all damage from one direction because you have your block up, and then you switch to the axe form and drop damage on an enemy where you can be attacked and you can take damage. What I found is the best thing to do is get a ranged cast and drop it on an enemy that way, then channel from a distance and fire your special to detonate the cast. Or don't do any of that. You could just not do any of that, play a pure cast build, use your special only defensively, and it's still a really solid weapon. So it goes in A tier. And then last up, Aspect of Thanatos. Turns out, the God of Death's weapon is very good at dealing death. This stacks up to 20% crit chance if you hit enemies without taking damage. So you're constantly gaining, then losing, then gaining as you get hit during the fight. This is for an Omega attack build. And if you get Psychic Whirlwind, where you can use other things while using your Omega attack, it is so fun. You spin, you win, you have big numbers going everywhere, you take massive chunks off of enemies, and overall I have greatly enjoyed the playstyle, plus I found it to be highly effective. Even at relatively low rank, though, I do recommend ranking this one up to get the maximum crit chance of 20%. Honestly, it's really hard for me to place these weapons, because I could see all of them being slightly higher or lower rank relative to each other. Last up, Rival the Argent Skull, with 3 aspects. First up, Aspect of Melanoe. And initially, I really liked Aspect of Melanoe because I could fire out a skull, leave it on the floor, and then fire out another one and gain a damage bonus. Problem is, it turns out that the skull already has pretty high base damage. And also, while you're comboing your attack and special, where you fire out the shells from your attack, then you pick them up with your special, I have to put this in C tier. Simply because it's a very awkward playstyle, and ultimately I don't think it does what the skull does best, which is nuking things with the special. There's only a bonus to your attack here. So, next up we have Aspect of Medea, where this is the one-punch skull build. You get the skull, you arm the charges, and then you slam them into an enemy's face. This is another incredibly fun thing, and fun factor alone, I'd probably put it up in S. Practically speaking, I found it a little bit hard to build, where I'd probably want something like Bolstered Array to get up to 5 shells and then full salvo to detonate all 5 at once. But I've also noticed that that's not necessarily ideal. Sometimes I do want to only charge 2, and then charge 2 again afterwards. And so ultimately I think B tier is fair here, because on the one hand I've had a lot of fun playing it, and on the other hand I've had less success than I've had with some of the other weapons, and even one of the other aspects on this weapon. But that said, regardless of this ranking, even if I had put it down in D tier because I just epic failed with it, I strongly recommend you unlock Aspect of Medea and you try it out for the one-punch fun factor alone, because it is hilarious to just one-shot enemies by using a gigantic fist in the form of a skull. Then last up, we've got Aspect of Persephone, another very powerful weapon aspect, which I'm going to put in A tier. This enhances your special, and in general, it also enhances your Omega moves. So, you don't necessarily have to stack up glory to gain the bonuses. That's nice, and being able to extend your special by stacking up glory is pretty good. But instead, you can just work on the fact that your Omega special is already very strong, it already gives you invulnerability, it's kind of like the shield from the original Hades, and this just makes it better. I've found that the special spam builds on Rival are the ones that I've had the most success with, and so A tier it goes because it's the thing that best enables the special playstyle. And so that's my tier list for the 15 weapon aspects in Hades 2. Here we go. From the top, Aspect of Momus on the staff, Aspect of Pan on the daggers, and Aspect of Thanatos on the axe are all S tier. That's because these are the things that I've had a lot of fun playing, I've found them to be relatively easy to build, and I've had a lot of success with them. Then in A tier, we've got Aspect of Eos on the wands, since that's the only thing that I've had any success with, aspects of Melanoe and Charon on the axe in general is very strong, and Aspect of Persephone on the skull. Again, I would have a lot of success with most of these builds, where I can easily clear Heat 16, if not higher. Then in B tier, we have Aspect of Melanoe on the staff, Aspect of Melanoe on the daggers, and Aspect of Medea on the skull, where I haven't had quite as much success. I've failed more runs, I've struggled more. It's still fun, and in some cases, like the Aspect of Melanoe on the daggers, it really has to do with more of it. You need to build it in a very specific way. You really want the extra damage bonus to your attack, extra damage bonus upgrade from Daedalus to backstab enemies. If you don't get these things, it's going to feel really awkward, whereas a lot of the things in A and S tier need less Daedalus upgrades and less specific boons in general, though they do scale extremely well with them. Then in C tier, this is where I start getting into weapons that I actively avoid playing. Things like Aspect of Circe on the staff, that I feel like the other two aspects just do its job better. Or Aspect of Artemis on the daggers, where I'm just not that good at using it, so I tend to fail my run whenever I pick it. And again, Aspect of Melanoe on the skull, something that I liked initially, and you can see that in some of the early things I said about it, but ultimately I find the other two aspects are more powerful. And then in D tier, it's the Umbral Flames. I do not like this weapon, I generally do not like the playstyle of it, and so I avoid playing it whenever possible. But again, that's just my opinion. That's just the weapons that I personally have had success with. And so now I'm curious, what weapons have you had the most success with? What are your god runs? And does your tier list agree with mine? be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And if you do like tier lists, then maybe check out my second channel, Tenkiei Gaming, TENKIEI links down below, where I post tier lists for a variety of indie games. Of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. And if you support, you might even see your name on screen like these fine folks here. Also, thank you to everyone who watched to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly had a lot of fun making it, and I always like sharing my experiences playing a game, along with what I find success with and what I struggle on. So I'm glad you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.